So we're going to do some quick color mixing for skin tones today, just to get a bunch of different ranges of skin tones that we can mix from and to show a bunch of different undertones. I've got a couple references we're going to look at while we're working on it. So just to give you a wide range. So some of you will have bought maybe a peach tone that says flesh on it. That is not the color of anyone's flesh. It is way orange. It is at best, possibly Caucasian, maybe. I'll show you how to mix it to at least something close to someone's, but there's a reason we don't buy one color and then just paint with it, right? So I've got a couple of our primaries out across the top, a red, a yellow, and a blue. I've got the phthalo, I've got white, I've got a black and a white. At the bottom here, I've got a pre-mixed green that I like. It's like a fairly neutral green, leans yellow if anything, but you can go ahead and mix one out of your blue and your yellow. Just saves me a little bit of time. And I've got a little bit of burnt sienna, but I'm also going to show you how to mix it. So to make a burnt sienna effect, we're going to do a little bit of green and a little bit of red. This is what I use. You'll see me do it a lot also in watercolor. That's my go-to general mix for most of my skin tones. I'm going to quickly add a little touch of medium because I've got all these squished out so that we can quickly reference them while we're mixing. And a little medium on top is going to help me not dry them all out so quickly since I'm mixing and trying to pull up on top of white so that you can see them as I'm going. They're going to dry very quickly on me. So you can see that red and green mixed together made a very nice neutral brown. As I keep adding just a little bit of white to it, it cools it down, but it also keeps adding it paler and paler. We get a nice range of skin tones. All of them have a little bit of a pinky undertone, a little bit of a redder undertone. I had a little bit more red on the back of my brush there, so you can see if you add just a touch more pink into it, we can end up with a really nice kind of like warm tone to it. If we add a little bit more yellow into it, we can walk it back into something closer to an olivey tone, but it still feels a little overly warm on the pink side. So if you keep buffing it in and remembering that white is going to continually cool your tones also as we bring them up in value, we're cooling it because our white is naturally like cooling the overall hue of our paint. You just have to keep that in mind as you're mixing. So mixing again to make my own burnt sienna, a little bit of green, a little bit of red, and a touch of blue. I want to create something that has a cooler tone overall. So this is a shadow color that I use for a lot of my deeper skin tones. It's a little purplier, has a little more blue in it, but still green and red base. But the problem is when I start mixing white into it, since that has that cooling tone, it goes gray so fast. Even if I add a little bit of yellow into it, it just gets this like very muddy texture. So I tend to mix up some, like I might use this as my shadow colors, and then I would use something more like that burnt sienna or that color we just mixed up above to create some more of my midtones to keep us more alive looking and less heading into our gray tones if I'm working on my darker colors. You can create some really nice, beautiful dark shadows and almost get all the way to black by creating a nice deep purple with this, and then adding that little touch of opposite purple is yellow in, and you can get a nice, beautiful, deep color with that you can use as your darkest shadows and some of your line work in a deeper skin tone. And a little bit of yellow helps us get it very nicely into like something more of like an olive complexion deep skin tone that works really well. And if by working it a little closer to an olive, when we start adding in those white tones, we don't go as gray. So getting it closer to a yellow instead of keeping it in a purpley tone helps us have a little bit more room to mix out from when we add the white. But know that if it's leaning purple as a skin tone, when you start mixing out with your white, you're definitely gonna go gray, right? So you can see we're kind of pulling it out. We've got a nice range of colors here. We've got some range. We've got an assortment. We have options. I'm trying to show you kind of also how you can mix down with adding a little bit of rosiness into it. You can get kind of a nice, very neutral, it's not leaning super warm, it's not leaning super yellow. You can get that very, very pale kind of neutralized color that this is very hyper washed out because of the lighting partially. but it can be hard to get those bright highlights without adding pure white onto the page sometimes. But if we get something that feels a little bit more neutral, it can help a lot. This is another example that if we start adding too much white into something, so this is, I just wanted to show you what happens if you do use black in your base paints. Then when you start adding white into it and trying to mix up midtones, it's gonna go gray so quickly. So it's one of the reasons I want you to just kind of keep that in mind, what's inside your mixed color, especially if you're gonna be adding white to create your midtones or your highlights and wet blending it. If you've got black inside of it, if it's leaning purple, know that you're going to end up definitely heading into gray tones as you're dealing with skin tones in particular. That can be kind of off-putting depending on your stylistic choices. Of course, there are places where we paint skin very gray, and it's what we were intending. It's the goal. So here I'm mixing a little bit of burnt sienna, a little bit of green, and just a touch of blue. I'm creating something that's a little bit darker. And we will be able to pull out from this and mix in with a little bit of yellow and white and pull out something that's a nice mid-tone that we can actually tone down some of that really bright orangey tone that we have in the pre-mixed paint that we might have bought. So this is a deep purple. I want to show you another base tone that you can create. So by mixing a deep purple and this yellow, you only need the tiniest amount of purple because your purple is really, really, really pigmented and your yellow is slightly translucent. So a tiny prick of purple into a lot of yellow creates a nice base tone for something that leans more mixable but still has that like warmer, cooler undertone of a deeper, more deep value skin tone. So now we're going to be able to mix white into it without it going as gray as quickly. And we can pull up, we get a medium and then can get close to light, but we're certainly not going to be able to head up any further than this without it getting kind of washed out and grayish and sad. That's when I might choose to transfer over to using a different shade as we transfer across the face. There's lots of different colors. No skin tone is any one shade, just like gradiated. We have pools of warmth, of blood in different areas of our face, different areas of our skin. Our hands are redder, our noses are redder, our cheeks are redder. So taking note also of like where we are cooler versus where we are warmer and kind of manipulating your color choices to use that. Cleaning up my white because I realized I've dipped into it so many times I've got a bunch of different stuff in there. So I am seeing how light I can take that mixture with that little bit of purple, that little bit of yellow, how light could I get it and make a feasible skin tone, something usable. Just that tiny amount of purple, just the smallest smidgen and quite a bit of yellow and quite a bit of white. And I would add a little extra red to help bring life back into it. But we're working with very small amounts of pigment mixed into white in order to keep it kind of alive. And I'm adding a little bit of glazing medium to keep it wet while I'm figuring it out. Because my paint is definitely absorbing it while I'm working. Or my paper is, I'm sorry. But you can also imagine that this is a good opportunity if you have that peachy pre-purchased paint. Think about adding just a touch of that, a small itty bitty, little tiny bit of that blue or a little tiny bit of that purple into your pre-bought peach when you're using it, just to tone it down, calm it, a little tiny bit of green. So here's another mix you can try as a base color. So I used a little tiny bit of red mixed into a quite heavy amount of white, which creates pink. Opposite of pink is green. A tiny amount of green mixed into that, and it's created a really nice base tone that leans on pink, which is some people's undertones. It's heavier on the pink than it was on the green, very small amount of green pigment in it. It's just there to neutralize a little bit. So we can create a really wide range of skin tones with a very limited palette of just pretty much your primaries. Since I know that that is all some of you have. You can also create a really nice range with just burnt sienna and green. You can create a really nice range with burnt sienna and white. Walking backwards from burnt sienna is your darkest color. You can keep getting lighter with just adding white, and that only kind of leans towards the orangey pinkies. It gets kind of beautiful. You can do burnt sienna and black and get darker. Just remember, when you mix it with white, it's going to gray out a little bit. You can use your burnt umbers. Those can create beautiful, deeper colors. They have cooler tones under them. Ochres, if you have them, that is a more neutral yellow, so I find them a little easier sometimes to mix for my skin tones than using a brighter yellow. If you have extra colors when you're working on something and you're like choosing what primary colors or what you're going to call your primaries for this, you know, what you're going to make your palette out of. Here I'm just, by the way, mixing kind of a little shade blast of a medium tone, a darker tone on the same area, and a lighter of it. So I'm kind of creating a little band of shading across this skin tone. I hope that helps. But when you're mixing your colors, just kind of think about how you can pre-plan for yourself by planning. Maybe you tip your yellow. If you've got a choice between a bright yellow and a more neutral one, and you're working on natural colors, choose the more natural yellow. That will be a helpful place to start. All right, I hope that helps.